Welcome to episode 90 of the Hipsters United podcast. My name is Chris, and joining me this week are Jason.
Hello.
Susan.
Hello.
And special guest Stacy.
Hello.
This week, the big news, obviously, is that Oceania is now streaming online a week before it's officially released for sale. And I have to make a confession before we start. I have actually not heard the album yet, as I am moving in less than a month, and I have been spending most of my time away from work packing boxes. I am, in fact, right now surrounded by piles of boxes that will hopefully not fall on me. But luckily, my other panelists have all had a chance to check it out, and I will play the role of the clueless host here. But Stacy, since you're our guest, why don't you start with your just general impressions of the album?
Okay, I'd like to talk about it because I really was kind of surprised. Actually, it was a pleasant surprise. I didn't really know what to expect after hearing the Teargarden material and liking some of it and maybe not being so impressed with other songs. I didn't really know if this album was going to be something that would totally captivate me or if I would just be kind of bored and yawning halfway through it. But I was actually really pleasantly surprised by the fact that most of the songs pretty much reached out and grabbed me right away. It was very fun to listen to. There were several of the songs that reminded me of other songs in good ways. And also I think the general vibe of the album is sort of positive as opposed to some of the other Pumpkins albums that have come out in the past. I really enjoyed the rockiness of some of the songs. We rocked pretty hard on some of them. And other songs are very pared down and simple, and I enjoyed that contrast very much. There were also some really nice synth effects that I had fun with because I'm a keyboardist, so that was fun for me. And some really interesting use of instrumentation and arrangements that I haven't heard in a while on Pumpkins albums. And also another thing that stood out to me was that Billy actually used a lot of female vocalists, backing vocals on this album, and that's something that hasn't been really, at least in my mind, done very often in recent years. So that was enjoyable too.
Now, had you heard the 30-second clips in advance? Were you kind of prepared for what the album would sound like at all in that regard, or did you wait and save yourself for hearing the full album?
I waited and saved myself.
Very What about you, Susan?
I'll have to agree with Stacy that the instrumentation stood out to me as something that is very different on this album. There's a sense that it was recorded with a full band. I think one thing that Billy has said recently is that, in the last couple albums or last several years, however long, he's been overthinking production. And so the one song-by-song model of Teargarden, he was overthinking production. I would actually say, to me, I see this as a problem going back perhaps even longer. Like when I look back to Zeitgeist, which is probably my personal least favorite Pumpkins album, although there's certainly songs I like from it. There's songs I like very much, particularly when they were performed live versus the album version. It doesn't sound like it's all Billy all the time playing everything but drums. And I like that it has more of that band feel. It sounds like these songs were worked out by a band. And whatever you want to say about the Pumpkins, Gish and Siamese Dream, blah, 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 they didn't play anything. Those songs were songs that they had worked out together. Even if Billy is the one who's playing the parts in the studio, I believe the band worked those songs out together. So I think that that's something very notably different. I also was very surprised by this album. I think Stacy, this is very echoing some of the things she said, that everything we had heard about this album going into hearing it was that it was an album about loneliness, getting older, feeling sort of depressed. And there are moments where it is definitely about that, but I didn't really think the album, not every song is about that, which was sort of surprising me. I was expecting to listen to this album and get really depressed, right? And it wasn't quite like that. So there's some very happy songs on this album. And I'm a fan of Happy Billy. I mean, I really came back into the fandom because I liked the happy, folksy songs from Spirits in the Sky. And I, for the most part, like most all of the Teargarden music. So to me, I liked the happy songs a lot. So yeah, I mean, yeah, those are my two biggest things that I would say is I was really surprised by the happy songs and by the band feel, which is something we haven't seen in a long time with Billy.
So was there something specific that kind of gives it that band feel as opposed to Zeitgeist, or was it just the general vibe and the presence of female backup vocals? And that's
well, there's the general vibe, the backing vocals. You can hear Nicole at times. I think you can hear Mike. The bass is very different than I've heard in a long time. I mean, maybe Lives One with Paz, you heard some prominent bass parts, but I haven't heard, prominent, weird running bass lines, melodic bass lines in a long time, maybe ever bass lines like this. So that was very notable to me. So it's very easy for me to pick out Nicole's role in this album. It's maybe less easy for me to pick out anything that Jeff specifically did, because it seems like to me Jeff and Billy are very similar, whereas James and Billy were totally just opposite guitarists, very different playing styles. I appreciated both of them. It seems like Jeff and Billy really exist in the same headspace. So it's like hard for me to identify a guitar part and say, okay, this is a Jeff part or this is a Billy part. Sometimes I may know because I've seen them play it live on video and I can kind of figure it out. But the bass is really noticeable. The backing vocals are really noticeable. Some of the just the arrangements of it, I would say. So anyway.
What about you, Jason?
This album is like, remember when the Pumpkins came out with Untitled, like right when they were going to break up, and Billy, maybe it was Billy, maybe it was just everyone else, but everyone was saying, oh man, this song sounds like classic Pumpkins. And I thought at the time, if you go back and actually listen to classic Pumpkins, this song does not sound like classic Pumpkins. It sounds too happy. It was like a heralding of the Zwan era more than it sounded like Siamese Dream. But there was something about, but it's the same thing Billy said that people have been telling him about Oceania, that it sounds like classic Pumpkins, but it doesn't sound like it. And it gives them that feeling, though. And I actually think that is right. I think this is one of the few times of the past, 10 years where the, advanced PR of the album, I think, is something that resonates with me, that I agree with. I think that's really true. But when I listen to the album, if I had to give it another title, it might be Mary Star of the Teargarden Embrace. Because this album is not Siamese Dream 2 and is not... when I think, what does this remind me of? And that was kind of, as I was thinking, okay, I'm going to podcast about this. So I'm listening to the album thinking, what would I compare all this to? And the reference points I was coming up with are, with a few exceptions, but they're almost all like the last 10 years stuff. I guess that's kind of the sonic and emotional ballpark that this album is in, is those three albums: Mary Star of the Sea by Zwan, The Future Embrace, and then the Teargarden by Kaleidyscope stuff. Lyrically or thematically, whatever you want to say, the most striking thing to me is that I kept hearing echoes of Spangled and The Fellowship, the themes of those songs, which are sort of like love, 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 and then Are You With Us or Against Us? I'm Really Awesome. And it's sort of like, I'd say about 80% of the lyrics on this album seem to go in one of those two boxes. So, but that said, comparing it to The Fellowship is kind of lame, because probably every song on this album is a lot better than The Fellowship. I really didn't like that song, but and it's not like The Fellowship is the only song with that theme of I rule and stick with SP, but it's just one that sticks out in my mind. So, but that was kind of the lyrical message I was getting from this album, which is pretty straightforward. The lyrics are really straightforward on this record. It's, not always. I mean, there's plenty of like weird dodginess that is, classic Billy, but most of the time you know what he's singing and you know why he's singing it.
God, right on.
God, right on. Yeah. I have a funny thing to say about Quasar. I could probably say funny things about several of the songs, but Stacy talked about the instrumentation. I want to talk about two things in particular, which are the use of acoustic guitar first and the use of synth, because everyone on the online community freaks out about synth. Personally, I'd rather hear synth than acoustic guitar. I think acoustic guitar is kind of a horrible instrument usually, but I actually think the way acoustic guitar is used on this album is excellent. Like pretty much every time he uses it is very good, and I actually think the synths are very tasteful too. So 2 thumbs up basically on those two things, which acoustic guitar is maybe not controversial with anyone else, but it is with me. But the way he used it on this album, I'm totally there with him. I thought it sounded great. I think it sounds great, particularly on a song like Pinwheels, but in several other places too, the Celestials. And, I think the synths are well done throughout. So, kudos to Billy. I think the production is great. Great sounding record. I'd say maybe the best sounding record for my money since Melancholy, just in terms of how it sounds. I think every album since then I've had some sort of like hang up about the way they made the band sound, but I actually don't have any hang up with the way this band sounds. It jumps out of the speakers, it sounds clear, and it sounds great. So, that's my take.
So did you guys want to go song by song and talk about songs, or go in depth on any of the songs? I know I've heard, obviously, let's see, how many of these have been played live? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I've heard 5 of these songs live, and those are the only ones that have been played live. I was a little bit surprised when they came back in May that they did not add. I figured they might throw one more new one in live, but they did not. How did the album versions sound compared to the live versions?
They're pretty straight on. So
Right on.
yeah. So I mean, if you've listened to the 2011 recordings of Quasar, Panopticon, Pale Horse, Pinwheels, My Love Is Winter, those are very, very similar. A couple have sort of synth embellishment, which obviously the Pumpkins weren't touring with a keyboardist or a huge synthesizer live, so some of that, bits and pieces of that were lost. Probably the timpani on Pale Horse, they didn't have a timpani live. But the one that is different still to me, it's still hard for me to come to terms with the My Love Is Winter song, which started off as this mournful song in the 2010 tour. And I saw it in Charlotte in 2010 at that semi-public sound check that they did there. And I just loved that song with the dual guitar solo. And now, in this version, that's being played by, keyboard, basically. And the song is sort of transformed into this love, 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 all you need is love song from a very mournful, sad 70s arena rock type song. And so I think that's hard for me. I mean, I knew that it was probably going to sound more like the 2011 tour version, but I still like that 2010 version. But everything else is, almost is very, very, whatever they played in 2011 is pretty much what you can expect in the album, maybe with some synth.
Just about My Love Is Winter, I too really loved the live version. I thought the original live version reminded me a lot of the original live version of A Song for a Son, which I really liked. I really liked both of those. And what I think is kind of weird is he took a song, so I thought those were very similar, but he took A Song for a Son and he turned it into this like very multi-part cinematic type suite of like, an epic song. I'm sorry, I don't want to use that word. A multi-part suite is kind of cinematic, right? So, and then he took Mary Star of the Sea, he took My Love Is Winter, and he turned it basically into a Zwan song from 2002. It's like very odd. And then Oceania, the song on the album, is very much like A Song for a Son. Just thought I'd throw that in there in terms of being this cinematic multi-part song. So it's like, it took two songs that are almost identical. One he turns into the multi-part suite. The other one he turns into his Swan song, and then he writes a different multi-part suite. I don't know. But if Billy Corgan followed algorithms and rules, he wouldn't be interesting. So.
I just wanted to say another thing. I'm not really that familiar with the live material. Haven't been listening to a lot of it, but I did want to say something else about the arrangements. I'm kind of hung up on that, I guess. But one of the things I noticed, or one of the things I wanted to mention when Jason was talking about that, I was thinking about how that's something I love about Melancholy, is that there's so many different sounding songs. They're not all guitar. They're not all, they're not all the same beat. They're not all the same feel. And that's something I think this album achieves as well. There's a lot of different kind of surprising instrumentation. Sometimes you hear, on one song there was actually a glockenspiel part, and there's a woodwind sounding part. I don't know if it was actually played by woodwinds. I'm suspecting that it was synthesized oboe, but it did sound very woodwind sounding, and that's something that I haven't heard in a while on a Pumpkins album at all either. But just the contrast between hearing the synth parts and then hearing the very well done acoustic guitar, it was just very very, very well put together, in an album that keeps your interest as you go, because it's not all expected and it's not the same sound for every song.
It actually makes me wish they were touring with the keyboardist. Have I said this on the podcast before? I mean, I was already thinking that heading into this Oceania tour. Now I'm thinking it even more, knowing all the cool keyboard parts that are on this album. It makes me wish that they had at least a touring keyboardist with them for the tour. That would be really cool. But, I'm sure it will still be cool. So,
Chris, how about I give you the... I'm looking at my stupid little list. I think there may be only 3 songs where I had any sort of reference point that was from the original band. Do you want me to tell you what they were?
Sure.
I'll try to be funny about it. It's supposed to be an entertaining podcast, right? Quasar. Quasar kind of is like Cherub Rock by the way of Super Christ and Astral Planes. I mean, it really is. It totally kind of has a Cherub Rock type structure, especially the way it starts. I mean, if you don't hear Cherub Rock in that opening, I'm sorry, I don't know what you're listening to. But there's something in the riff that is very Super Christ-esque, and then the lyrics obviously kind of get into the Astral Planes territory. So, okay, so there was that one. Then there's the Celestials, which is track 3, and we'll talk. This is a song I think could be a single. Very Stand Inside Your Love-esque to me. Without being, I mean, people are going to hear these reference points and be like, no, it doesn't sound like that at all. And I mean, yes, it doesn't. But it's what song does it make you think of? If you had to make a comparison to old Smashing Pumpkins songs, I mean, that's the song that comes to mind. I mean, the guitar's crashing in and Stand Inside Your Love. It's very similar in the Celestials, and kind of a love song. And track 3 on the album seems like the single. It's just, that's the song that comes to mind. The other one is Inkless, and this one will probably make people turn the podcast off or something. The riff kind of reminds me of Hummer a little. Maybe I'm out to lunch, but it's kind of like Hummer reimagined as one of the closing songs on Melancholy, except it really sounds like Tilt, that outtake from The Future Embrace, more than any of that. So, but those are the, other than that, I don't have much that songs from the original band came to mind. Maybe the second half of Oceania is kind of beginning as the end is the beginning-esque, but and maybe One Diamond, One Heart is a little like apples and oranges, try, but it really isn't. I mean, the synth is it's a different kind of song. It reminds me of those songs because it's that kind of, it's kind of like how I said the Celestials is in the same album position as Stand Inside Your Love, and is the same kind of song. One Diamond, One Heart being track 6 kind of reminds me of Try, reminds me of Apples and Oranges, that sort of synth-driven song in the middle of the album that might be the 3rd single or something, It's it's just that kind of song, so. But it doesn't really sound like those songs too much.
And to speak to that same thing, I was looking at my notes while Jason was talking, and the one song that he didn't mention that I wanted to is the Chimera. The Chimera? Chimera? I don't know
Chimera.
how to say it. Chimera. It is... I actually, in my notes, wrote, it's Swan plus the Pumpkins. It's like a perfect blend of a Swan song and Rocket. Rocket came to mind during that, the guitar riff to me. So it was very, very Swan-esque, but yet I could hear that kind of crashing Rocket guitar riff.
Yeah, that song screams like Untitled, Ride a Black Swan, Bring the Light. Except even like more high energy and happy than any of those even, you know, it's like a new level of whatever. So
Billy described Glissandra as pretty and loud. Is that accurate? This was a Billy tweet from last year.
Anyone want to take that? Glissandra is like the Future Embrace song to me on the whole record. Without reminding me exactly of any Future Embrace song, it just reminds me of that album and the feel of it. I mean, obviously it doesn't have the same guitar sound, but you know, songs that come to mind when I hear it are Walking Shade, DIA, Mean Alloy. Every one of those songs comes to mind. I don't really know why, but that's just what it reminds me of. It doesn't remind me of anything but that.
Lyrically, I think it reminds me of that era a lot too. I mean, take that guitar, take that and make that a synth, and it's basically Future Embrace. Yes. Seriously.
No one said anything about Violet Rays. Is it a not memorable song or?
Violet Rays. It was very. It reminded me of a 70s rock ballad kind of. It was very arpeggiated guitar parts in the beginning and a really dreamy intro, and then it has an amusing lyric, which I enjoyed, where Billy proclaims, "I am so easy." But I like the song. I didn't write anything negative about it, which I tend to do that when I'm not feeling a song. I usually write something like lame or whatever. But it was actually very well done, I thought. And even though that lyric is kind of silly, it actually works in that song.
I have a hard time with that song. It's sort of like a man-horse song to me. I don't really... I have a lot of trouble relating to it. I mean, I'm about to be 30. Billy's over 40. He wants to go... to me, it's like he's going to go to a bar and make out with somebody and go home with that person because he's so depressed. And I don't know. I think I just am uncomfortable and I'm sad. Like that lyric, that message is really where that he's in on life, and it makes me feel really sad for him. So it makes me a little uncomfortable, and it makes me sad for Billy. So I think that's one of the saddest songs in the album to me, and it's actually kind of depressing, and I kind of want to avoid that song for that reason. Not that it's a bad song. I actually think it's quite a lovely song. I think it probably would do well on radio, but it makes me a little uneasy, I guess is the best word for it.
And I'll say just to jump back in, from a little older age perspective than Susan, not saying how much older, but I actually kind of saw it as almost a retrospective, been there, done that, this is how I used to be kind of song, rather than this is where I am in life right now kind of song. So that's why it worked for me.
From the male perspective. No, I'm kidding.
What did you think of Man-Horror Song?
Well, like Susan, I actually think Violet Rays is a potential single. When I tried, like I said, I've been trying to think of other songs it reminds me of. It reminds me of nothing more than Riverview by Swan. That's the closest I can come. And I think it's actually very in the Billy Corgan songbook. It's an innovative song. I think it's one of the songs on the album that shows new tricks, which I think there are several songs like that, but I think that in particular is a hard song to draw comparisons to. I mean, in terms of mood, you might look to Bleeding the Orchid or Love Lies in Ruin, which is another Swan song that isn't on the album, like Riverview. But, a cool song, a potential single. It would be a weird single, but I think it could succeed. So, it's one of the two songs I think are the most likely singles, so...
Well, that's a good transition then. Obviously, there is no single. Nothing's been released to radio or anything. But if you're the record label and you want to make a big splash with the general public, the 2012 radio audience, the people that hang out at the pool at my apartment complex, which song?
Those people too, Chris.
Well, I think for me, Jason and Susan kind of talked to me about it a little. This is the one thing we did kind of talk about before. But we talked about the song The Celestials, which is very radio friendly. It was very, very much a singable song. You know, if you're singing along to the radio in your car, you can hook onto a lot of the lyrics pretty easily, and things that are, you know, easily accessible to most people. Like, I'm gonna love you 101%. I mean, that's pretty fun lyric to sing out loud at the top of your lungs. So I think that would be one of my songs that I'd like to hear as a single. Another one that kind of I was thinking would be a good single would be Inkless. I actually wrote down that it sounded very poppy. There's a nice guitar solo in the middle of it that I always love the Pumpkins guitar solos. So for me, that's kind of a important part of the song. And there's some nice synth stuff on that song, and then it's just kind of a love song, and there's some time changes in it that make it more interesting. I haven't always been a fan of the popular or the positive, I guess, Pumpkins love songs, but this is one that I think really I like, and I think it's because of the time changes in it that makes it more interesting.
I would agree. I would think my first choice for the single would probably be The Celestials. I think it's great. The only qualm I have about it is that people are going to be weirded out by the lyric, I am Special K. Because
I will be.
I will be Special K. Yeah. Sorry. Still weird.
Chris, are you weirded out by that?
That was actually in the 30-second clip, so I have heard that part, and it was a little strange.
So I will be Special K. So that's a little weird, but I think otherwise, I think that's like, to me, that is like the clearest hit single that Billy has had since, like, I don't know when. So send that biatch to radio, Billy, like, seriously. The other potential songs that I would think, I also agree Inkless is a good one. I do think Violet Rays, I think that will do more well with, like, the dark alternative rock radio. I don't know. I mean, I feel like Jason had mentioned One Diamond, One Heart as a potential. To me, I mean, it has that try feel to it, or even to me, less so. He mentioned Apples and Oranges. I would say more like Annie Dog, like the Tale of Dusty and Pistol Pete with the do 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 do. And so I don't know. I mean, I was like, Try is probably my least favorite single that the Pumpkins have ever put out. So I mean, I have a feeling that Billy maybe thinks that would be a good single, but I don't think that should be a single. I would say Celestials, Inkless, maybe Violet Rays. I actually like the idea of Pale Horse. Again, lyrically, I think it's going to confuse people. Thorazine. I also think that for a lot of people who don't, the people who want the Pumpkins to rock mainstream audience or whatever, that it's not going to scratch that itch. But I think it's a beautiful song. It's a beautifully done song. So I think that would be a good one to also do. But I think the top two are probably maybe Inkless and Celestials.
Little surprised nobody says the Schmera with its all-out caffeine, sugar high, overdrive, high tempo.
It is summer, actually. We need a summer jam.
Rockingness. It may just be a bit much. It may just be.
The time signature changes on that one. I do wonder if it's a little. It's almost too complex. It's like one song that kind of reminds me of too. Not necessarily the sound of it, but the structure of it a little bit is Tarantula.
I was just gonna say when you said it was too complex, I'm like, it's Tarantula, and that song was actually a hit. So I mean, like, as far as modern rock radio goes. So who knows? But yeah, I mean that's definitely a comparison point for that song.
So yeah, so maybe that. So I don't know. And I don't want to hate on One Diamond, One Heart too much, but I just don't. I feel like that's the single that in Billy's mind he'll think that'll be a single, but I think that should not be a single.
Chris, what you didn't ask is what song would be most suitable for a Hyundai commercial.
Is there a song about the epic lap in here somewhere?
I say that purely because I just wanted to say that Panopticon reminds me of no other Pumpkins song as much as FOL. I'm not saying it's like I know people don't like FOL. I'm not saying Panopticon is a bad song when I make that comparison. I'm just saying that's the song it most reminds me of.
That's interesting because I think of all the live songs, Panopticon is probably my favorite. So
Do you drive a Hyundai, Chris?
I don't, not right now. I will be in the market for a new car soon. I'll keep that in mind.
One thing I'll say about Panopticon, I mean, that actually could be maybe a single as well, maybe below all these other songs I've mentioned. So they're obviously, if they get that far down the list, they're probably not going to push another song to single. But one thing I'll say about it is that I was not really the greatest fan of that song with the live versions, and I think it was because maybe they sounded kind of muddy to me, and so I'm actually retracting what I said earlier, right, about that the songs were really the same, and I think it is pretty similar to what they played live, but somehow hearing it more clearly with the recording being really cleaned up, it sounded better to me, and I like that song a lot more than I did hearing the live 2011 versions of it. So I guess I'm kind of like going back on what I said before, but I actually think that could also be a single-ish song, maybe.
Okay. Obviously, it just sounds like the album is hit packed. I mean,
yeah, it's half the album here.
The Amazon ad text was correct. Well, I think there's probably 9 songs you could send to radio. I mean, that may be true of a lot of albums, though. You know, it doesn't. But what's actually going to work? Glissandra is another one, maybe. You know, I used to know what a wish was for. I mean, that's a pretty catchy lyric, I think, and he repeats it quite a bit. And there's kind of a cool guitar part, and it's mid-tempo. I mean, you could see that one maybe succeeding. So anyway, yeah, Chris, hit packed.
Well, that's a lot about the individual songs. What about the album as a whole? So obviously, Billy has done a lot of different things over the past few years, from Machina and Machina 2 to then he was in Zwan, and then he had a solo album, and then Zeitgeist was very, very heavy and rockin', and then Teargarden was less so. Finish the sentence. Oceania is the best Billy Corgan album since
Mary Star of the Sea. I think that for me, I actually was a big fan of Zeitgeist as a whole album. I really didn't see that as a low point in their career, but so for me, honestly, that was a really good album. But I think this one particularly, for me, if I had to rank it right now after just hearing it once, it would probably rank somewhere in the top 4 albums, maybe number 4. I would say I like it better on first listen than I like Machina. So that's me.
Susan is signaling. Oh gosh, the answer I think is either Machina or maybe even Melancholy and Infinite Sadness. And this is coming from someone who really likes Zeitgeist in me, really likes it. And I loved Zwan, but I think Mary Star of the Sea as a record doesn't do them justice. So to answer that, it sounds like I'm dissing the later period stuff. I mean, Johnny Firecloud of Antiquiet thinks it's the best album Billy's done since Melancholy. But I think clearly from him, the way he's acted, and I won't get into that, but when he says that, he means that everything since Melancholy sucked, and I don't feel that way at all. I'm a big fan and enjoy The Future Embrace even, quite a bit. I probably like it better than Adore, and that's another point at which a lot of people are going to turn off this podcast, that I just said that. But I would at least go to Machina, I think, and it's more because the records have flaws in listenability and production to me since that album, not so much that they're bad records, but the sonics on this one are great, and that's a big thing to me. And it just sounds super, and I think the songs are really good. So it's like I said before, this is Mary Star of the Teargarden Embrace, and that may sound like a bad idea to you, but it's like the best version of whatever that brings to mind. It's a very different album from Zeitgeist. But okay, so there's my answer.
You ready, Susan?
I don't know if I can give you an answer to this question, Chris. I can talk about kind of how I see things. So I think I'm a big Adore fan. So I think of the old band, I don't know. It's pretty close between Melancholy and Adore, but Adore probably is my favorite of the old band's albums. So that's kind of the place where I come from. I really liked Mary. I mean, I like Machina. It's okay. It's not my favorite album. Mary Star of the Sea, I liked. I wasn't really aware of any Swan songs at that time in 02, 03, 04 outside of what was on the album. So I really liked it. When I came back to the fandom, a couple years ago, and people were like, "Oh, that album is nothing compared to Swan." I'm like, well, I thought the album was pretty good. I really like Future Embrace. Don't really care for Zeitgeist very much, although I like some of the songs. I don't like the album per se. Like Teargarden a lot. So I don't know. I don't know what my answer is. I toyed with saying Adore. I toyed with saying Mary Star of the Sea. And I toyed with saying Future Embrace. So I don't know, because it seems like maybe like every other album, Billy's really hitting a home run with me or something. So, I mean, to me, there's never been really a lull in like his ability to produce songs that interest me, except for probably the Zeitgeist period is probably the one time where I just really wasn't digging what he was putting out there. So it's really hard for me to answer that question.
Chris, I guess I want to add a caveat. Maybe say I might half agree with Stacy when she says Mary Star of the Sea, because I think if you go back and listen to Mary Star of the Sea after hearing Oceania, Mary Star of the Sea is going to sound a lot better than you may have remembered. Whereas I think Oceania makes Future Embrace seem kind of bad. It's kind of hard to explain, but in a weird way, if Oceania elevates Mary Star of the Sea, then maybe it's the best album since Mary Star of the Sea. Mary Star of the Sea is better now, looking back at it from post Oceania. So maybe it's so. But I would just say that. So.
Well, theoretically, this album is part of the overall Teargarden by Kaleidyscope project. How much of it is I guess up to interpretation. But whereas previously all the Teargarden songs came out onesie twosie, obviously this is kind of one cohesive unit. How do you guys think that this album compares to the output of the rest of Teargarden? I mean, obviously you've compared some of the songs like To a Song for a Son and Astral Planes and things like that, but do you think this album makes the rest of Teargarden look really weak? Do you think it fits in thematically with the rest of Teargarden? What do you think?
I think it's this may enrage people, like seriously enrage them. I'm the Teargarden fan on this Hipsters United committee, right? I think it's very much of a piece with them. Incredibly so, in fact. The synth lines, obviously Billy, I've said this before on podcasts, Billy bought this really cool tool, his huge synthesizer Ichabod, and he's going to use that tool, right? And so the arpeggiated synths are in several cases present on this album. The I guess I would say spiritual vibe is present on this album. The vibe, this sort of, I don't know if you want to call it hippie, but all you need is love is all you need vibe is definitely on this album. I'm going to get into my head with tarot stuff here, but the idea of this journey of this person through life and struggles and being horribly alone, the fool's journey, I would say. I mean, maybe I could probably set up an interpretation of Oceania where that's even present. So to me, they're very similar. Where they differ quite a bit is in, again, that, as we've talked about from the beginning of the podcast, the sort of the band feel. Because in those Teargarden songs, it was pretty much Billy and Mike, right? So, and I guess there were others, Asan Spivak is on Stitch in Time, right? But to me, they feel very much of a piece with that. I mean, Teargarden to me also sort of harkened back to sort of these 70s motifs of the music that we know Billy is listening to. Like, he's been very vocal, like, I'm not listening to any new music. I'm listening to 70s music and classical music. And sort of some of those 70s motifs, prog rock or whatever. When he was talking about Oceania being prog rock, I was kind of like shaking in my boots because I'm like actively dislike Pink Floyd, right? Just not my thing. He didn't really totally prog out on this album ultimately, but he took the pieces, just like with Teargarden, he took the elements of prog, some elements of prog, and brought them into the album. So to me, I think if there ever is a Teargarden box set, right, where we have our 44 songs, which he apparently is still thinking about because he talked about it, just in the last 2 weeks. I think these will flow together fairly well. There will be, obviously they sound a little bit different, sonically, I think. But I think largely it will work. And so I think it sounds more like what he did over the last 2 years than like Siamese Dream, for sure. Absolutely, for sure. No question about that.
Yeah, and like I said, no question about that. I mean, Teargarden, I think, is one of the 3 records it harkens back to most. But that said, if I said that I think Oceania will make Mary Star of the Sea look better and it will make Future Embrace maybe look a little worse, I unfortunately think it makes the earlier Teargarden songs probably look even a little worse than people already thought they did. But and for 2 reasons, but one of those is not really the earlier Teargarden songs' fault. And the other one probably is their fault. And I would say the one that's their fault is I think the synths are done a lot better on Oceania than they are on the Teargarden stuff. So, and that's just sort of kind of revealing the lousiness of some of the synths. Sorry. Okay, maybe they weren't lousy, but
you defended the synths before, right? On an earlier podcast when people are at the height of their rage, when Lightning Strikes came out, and people were like at the height of their insane rage about synths. At that point, you defended them, but now you're saying they sound worse to you than they did before?
Well, there's nothing wrong with using synth, but I just think it's the one that it's just used better on the new record. But Billy can use synth all day. I don't care. Okay, but the other reason, and I really want to push this one, and this is not the fault of the earlier Teargarden songs. I think after listening to Oceania, people are really going to realize there really is something about albums. Because I'll tell you, say he was still doing Song at a Time, and like the next 2 songs had been, just throw this out there, say the next 2 songs for Teargarden had been One Diamond, One Heart, and Pinwheels. People would have been like, what the hell is this? Just like they were pretty much every time a Teargarden song came out, And the albumness of Oceania makes the Oceania songs seem better than they are. And the non-album, randomness of the scatteredness for the Teargarden songs makes those songs seem worse than they are.
I think one of the lessons we've learned from this, if you're Britney Spears or, a pop starlet, you're releasing these power pop dance songs, release single after single after single after single, because what you see is what you get. Billy Corgan writes many different types of songs. So if you're releasing a song by song by song, people are like, what the heck is going on? And when you put it into some kind of coherent relationship to one another, or you have to interact with it. And I'm echoing the things Billy said, which kind of irks me on some level. But Billy, you win. Okay, so when you put these songs into relationship with one another, it does make more sense as a package. You do get a sense. Listening to this album, I feel like I get some sense of, even if I don't really relate to it, I get some sense of where Billy is at in life right now.
See, the lesson I would take away then is that Billy needs to just write all power pop dance songs. Are any of the Oceania songs sung from the point of view of a person on a dance floor to the DJ?
No.
I don't think it'll go well at my pool then.
I would actually freaking love for Billy Corgan to write a song like that. I know it will never happen, but I think it would be amazing.
Well, I guess critics will be reviewing the album soon now that it's out there for real. Do you guys think it'll be well received critically outside of our little bubble of Pumpkins fandom?
Yes.
And scene.
I absolutely do, and we anticipated this on an earlier podcast, and we're still anticipating because we don't know. But I predicted several podcasts ago we were entering into a new pro Billy era from the press, and I just think now, having heard the album, I think that 10 times as much. I think they're totally gonna go for it. I really do. So Billy's gone through purgatory or whatever you want to call it with the music press, and now they're going to love him again. I really believe that. I think this album's going to be a success with the press. But see, here's the problem with that is, what difference does it make? And Billy just said this in an interview this week, and he's totally right. He was like, we've got one moment with this song, with this album. It'll last about a week, and then it'll be over. That's right. I mean, they might get great reviews, but in a month it'll be like, remember that Smashing Pumpkins album that came out a month ago? Wow, that was a long time ago. You know, it just...
But at least then maybe it will get mentioned on Paz and Jop this year.
Oh yeah. No, this is the year they get off the, no doubt. This is the year they break their incredible streak of complete omission.
Or what was the year when Song for a Son wasn't included, but the song from the UPS commercial that was a parody of an existing song did get included? That was great.
Yeah. No, they literally have not gotten a mention on Paz and Jop in 4 years, which is incredible. And from Zeitgeist, I think it was that they didn't get any album mentions at all, and they got 2 mentions for singles. I mean, just unbelievable. Unbelievable. Like, bands that are totally reviled would get mentioned. You know, and the Pumpkins were on some unbelievable level of zero. I mean, it's hard to explain. But no, that's over. Success is coming, I believe, anyway.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with Jason, and I think also harkening back to something Susan said about the experience of the album as a whole, I think that's part of what, at least, I mean, obviously Zeitgeist was just panned for whatever reason. I've never really understood why that didn't go anywhere with critics, because I thought it was a good album and enjoyed it, but for whatever reason people couldn't get past United States, I guess.
They love this, the critics love this sort of like I saw it referred to once as the Strings and Things version of Smashing Pumpkins. They love all the like weird instrumentation and the like sort of fantasy type songs, and they don't like the Billy Corgan version of Black Sabbath, you know, and they don't like the goth Billy Corgan. And Zeitgeist was the Billy Corgan version of Black Sabbath, and the critics just can't deal with that. It doesn't even matter if it's good or not. It's just not the kind of Billy Corgan they want to like give big ups to, you know.
That makes sense. And I think also part of why Oceania will go farther with critics than, well, I mean, obviously the reason it will go farther with critics than the Teargarden songs is just that whole concept of the album. Like Susan said, it's just, I think it's really hard for music listeners who are actually, you know, intellectual in any way to grab on to one song or one concept. And I think that holds true for me. If I go back to any of the Pumpkins albums, if I were to listen to them just track by track, you know, not to say that I always agree with Billy's track listing order, but just listening to the track by track thing and not having any kind of coherent way to plug these songs in. For instance, if I heard the song Annie Dog, like just as a standalone song, I would think, what the heck is this? You know, but hearing it as a part of the Adore album is actually, like, that's one of my favorite tracks. So I think it's just, it gives you a frame of reference. Someone just made fun of me the other day because I bought a CD, and they were like, you still buy CDs? What's wrong with you? And I said, you know, for me, it's about, and of course, part of that is that I'm showing my age a little bit, but part of it for me is that it is a total experience of holding this album in my hands and knowing that the person that made it or the people that made it had a vision for it in some respect. They you know, cohesive unit of songs. They sat down and thought about what order the tracks needed to be in, maybe even wrote some of the tracks relating to other tracks, and then they provided artwork for that. And it's just a whole experience, a whole artistic experience rather than just a song. And I like some pop songs too, don't get me wrong, you know, the whole DJ by the pool thing or whatever is fun too, but I just, when I listen to a Pumpkins album, that's one of the things for me that really has always stood out and been an important part of my Pumpkins listening experience. So
I think these two are overly optimistic. I think you can't underestimate the number of people out there who are just convinced that Billy Corgan is a megalomaniac asshole and that everything he does must turn to shit. Like, I just think there's a lot of people out there like that. I think that even those people will eventually come to the light, right? But I don't know that now is the time. I don't think Billy is old enough. I don't think we have enough perspective on the 90s work in the culture yet. I mean, maybe the reissues are helping with that somewhat, but it's just it's too soon, in my opinion. I think there will be a significant minority, at least of critics, who bash this album because they can and because it's Billy Corgan and because they like to beat up on Billy Corgan. I think even those people, however, will have to say, well, he just keeps going. You know, over and over on the 2011 tour, the 2010 tour, particularly last year, these people would write about Billy and say, well, he just keeps going. He's not going away. He's not going to shut up. You know, it's almost like this realization is setting in that, like, no matter what nasty things I say about Billy, he's just going to keep going. So, I mean, I think some people will diss it. I think they will find things to diss. If I was going to write a negative review of this album, I could write a negative review of this album about things I really don't like. The things that I like about it are far, 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 far outweighed by that. But there are things that, like I said, like the lyrics of Violet Rays that sort of unsettled me, right? So I could write a review in which I talk about Billy Corgan being some kind of man-child that can't grow up, right? I can see some critic writing that. I don't think that. That's not the overall message of this album. I'm not even sure that's what I should be taking away from Violet Rays. But on a first listen, that's a little unsettling, right, to hear it come out of his mouth. So I think there will be some people who come around, right? We already know that Johnny Firecloud has now declared what an inspiration he is after, like, really, I mean, you can't underestimate how much this guy over the past several years really, really, really said hateful things about Billy and his music. And now he's inspired by Billy. Great. I mean, I don't want to begrudge him the opportunity to change his mind. But is this really so much better than everything since Melancholy, since Adore, you know, all of Zwan, everything? That's where I start to have a problem with it. So, I mean, I think that there will be some people who come around. I think maybe the negative reviews will not be as negative, but I think there will be some negative reviews out there for sure, just because this is Billy Corgan and he's a polarizing figure for people. Love him or hate him. So yeah.
I just want to add one thing to what Susan was saying about if I were going to write a negative review of this, because I actually had that thought, and I would say they sound like a Smashing Pumpkins cover band, and I guarantee you'll see that in the negative reviews that will come up, that they sound, and I don't really feel that way myself. I think they sound like the Pumpkins. Obviously, Mike Byrne's drumming is different, and Nicole Fiorentino's bass lines are different. But I basically agree, I sign on to the whole, like, it feels like the Pumpkins. You know, certain points in, like, particularly Panopticon and My Love is Winter, toward the end of those songs, I mean, there's a sort of a Billy Corgan moment in those songs where it's like, you know, nobody, like, creates that moment in the song like he does, you know, and that, you know, makes me feel that way. The same kind of feeling I've always had listening to some of his better stuff. But I do think, like, I think particularly people might say that they sound like a cover band on some of the last songs on the album, like the Shmera, Glissandra, and Inkless. Because those songs, it's weird. They sound like the bands that people always say sound like the Pumpkins and that I think don't actually sound like the Pumpkins. So I can totally hear people hearing those songs and saying they sound like Silver Sun Pickups or something. Like, they sound like a Smashing Pumpkins wannabe band with regard to those songs. But the weird thing is those songs actually don't sound like Smashing Pumpkins songs. They sound like Future Embrace songs. So, like, you know, I'm not really buying that.
The other thing I think people will say, people who praise the album, people will say, well, this album is so much better because Billy Corgan finally got people to edit him and tell him no and push him around. Because you can tell it's recorded by a band, right? So people are going to use this to say Billy Corgan is only good when he has people that will protest or people that, you know, won't kowtow to what he's doing. And I feel like they're going to give all the credit to Mike, Nicole, and Jeff.
Isn't that the ultimate irony, though?
No,
I thought these people were yes men, and now they're the ones who are running
exactly, but these people are not going to be aware of that. They said, oh, you know, these people have signed on, the Billy Corgan and his crew of whatever, and the yes men. Now they're going to say, well, we like this, so they must actually be no men, right? We were wrong about our impression, right? I mean, I hate to say this.
It turns out Mike Byrne is actually the megalomaniac.
Some of these people. It really is. It really is. So, I mean, I really feel like a lot of the positive reviews will say that. And it's ironic because to me, I also feel like that band feel is something that really makes this album stand out to me and something that I enjoy. But I don't think that it's the band feel makes it good because Mike, Nicole, and Jeff were able to smack down Billy or something. Like, I don't think that.
Remember Melancholy and Infinite Sadness and The Airplane Flies High when Darcy and James and Jimmy were like, no, Billy, you can't do that. You can't go over the top. You can't do that kind of song. You can't do that kind of song. You can't do that kind of song. Remember that? The golden age of reining Billy in, Melancholy and Infinite Sadness, when he had a band that could say no. That was what made Melancholy great, Chris.
Well, some of these people think that, though. I mean,
I know they do, but it's not stupid. It's like so stupid as to be. I mean, yes.
Yeah. No, I have this view of James Iha. I don't know if we ever talked about this, that he was somebody who was willing to follow Billy along for a long time, despite whatever problems they had in their personal relationship, to try to, because he wanted to make great music and he knew Billy could do it. And he was willing to make this huge sacrifice. Like, they obviously weren't getting along for any number of years, right? And he made this huge sacrifice to follow along with Billy and make this great music. So, I don't know. I think that's a different kind of – it's not a yes man or a no man. It's that you're going to be the supporting, one of the columns that supports this thing going forward. So, I mean, I've always really admired James for that reason. Anyway.
And now he's had his revenge with Look to the Sky. And it's great success in Japan.
Evidently, it's getting somebody somewhere. I think it was the O Board. They said that they hear it a lot on the radio in Japan. Really? So, yeah. But I sort of sputtered out there. So I guess the critic thing is I think it will generally be far more positive than anything in a long time. But I think there will be this minority of really bad reviews. And so I just am not totally optimistic yet.
I want to apologize to Jeff Schroeder that we haven't talked about him much in this interview, or this podcast, but hey, at least he's not blurry and in the background of the new promo shot. So Jeff, you got that going for you.
Well, as everyone listens to the album again and again, I'm sure we'll have a lot more to say, so let's take it from here to the comments on the post for this podcast at hipstersunited.com, and I will join you there once I've had a chance to listen to and digest the album. So our closing song is the opener from Oceania, Quasar, from Lisbon, Portugal on May 26th, 2012. Good night, everybody. Records or Warner Brothers Reprise Records. All opinions offered by panelists or guests of the Hipsters United podcast are their own and do not represent the opinions of the Smashing Pumpkins. All audio during the show is licensed for non-profit use per the terms and conditions on the Live Music Archive at archive.org. Intro music is from the Machina 2 album released for free download on the internet by the Smashing Pumpkins in September of 2000.